My family always trash-talked me as a loser. I sat quietly at my brother's engagement party when his fiancée suddenly stared at me and whispered, "Wait, aren't you?" Everyone froze. Even Mom went speechless. Blake hugged the kitchen wall like it was his best friend, watching the whole circus through the doorway. His brother Trevor's engagement party was in full swing. You know how these things go. Lots of fake laughing, expensive drinks, and everyone acting like they actually gave a damn about each other. He shouldn't have shown up. But skipping would have just given them more ammunition for their favorite hobby, calling him the family screw-up. Blake tugged at his wrinkled shirt. Probably should have ironed it, but whatever. Everyone else looked like they'd stepped out of some fancy catalog while he looked like himself. 28, and still getting the disappointed parent treatment. Still the kid who wasted his life on those stupid computer games, while golden boy Trevor climbed the corporate ladder. Blake's phone buzzed in his pocket. Probably another notification from his game hitting some new milestone. Not that anyone here would care if they knew. His mom Linda swept past carrying appetizers that cost more than his grocery budget. Didn't even glance his way. Trevor stood there like some kind of poster boy for success, arm wrapped around his fiancée Samantha. She was, wow, the kind of woman who probably never had an awkward day in her life. Blonde hair that looked professionally styled, dress that screamed money, the whole package. Dad was gearing up for another one of his speeches. Blake could practically recite it by heart at this point. Trevor's achievements, Trevor's bright future, Trevor's everything. Meanwhile, Blake would get those sideways looks, the ones that said, "When's this one going to get his act together?" The thing was, Blake had gotten his act together. Big time. But explaining that he'd built a multi-million-dollar gaming empire from his crappy apartment? Yeah, that conversation had gone about as well as you'd expect. Stop playing games and get a real job, they'd said. So he'd stopped trying to explain. Sometimes he wondered what would happen if they knew the truth. But honestly, they probably still wouldn't get it. The praise kept flowing like someone had left a faucet running. Blake checked his watch. Maybe he could slip out in another 20 minutes without seeming rude. His phone kept buzzing with 5-star reviews and download notifications. But this wasn't exactly the crowd that would appreciate mobile gaming success. Trevor launched into his gratitude speech, voice all smooth and practiced. His eyes swept the room but somehow managed to skip right over Blake. Even when being thankful for family support, Blake remained invisible. Story of his life, really. "I have always had incredible role models," Trevor continued, and Blake caught that emphasis on incredible that somehow felt like a dig. Parents who taught me about real achievement. There it was, real achievement. Because apparently building something from nothing wasn't real enough. Blake's game had pulled in $15 million last year alone, but hey, it wasn't a corner office on Wall Street, so it didn't count. Mom nodded along like Trevor was delivering the Gettysburg Address. Samantha's phone lit up and she glanced down. Probably some social media notification. But then her face changed completely. The polite smile vanished, replaced by this look of total confusion. She stared at her screen like it had just grown tentacles. Then she looked up, straight at Blake. Not the usual dismissive glance people gave the family disappointment. This was different, intense, like she was trying to solve some puzzle, and he was the missing piece. Trevor kept talking about wedding plans, something about the Hamptons. Very fancy, but Samantha wasn't listening anymore. She kept switching between her phone and Blake's face, and with each look, her expression got more shocked. Blake's stomach started doing gymnastics. What was on that screen? His game had been featured in a bunch of articles lately, and there'd been that interview where they'd used his photo. Oh shit, this was about to get interesting. Samantha took a step back from Trevor, phone clutched in her hands like it contained state secrets. She couldn't stop staring at Blake, and he felt like a bug under a microscope. The room kept buzzing with conversation, but she looked frozen in place. Blake's mind raced through all the ways this could go wrong. TechCrunch had done that feature on indie developers last month. Gaming Weekly had interviewed him about reaching 50 million downloads. He'd been careful to keep his success separate from his family life, but the internet didn't care about privacy. Trevor finally noticed his fiancée acting weird. "Samantha, what's wrong with you?" She didn't answer, just held up her phone and compared it to Blake's face one more time. Her hands were shaking now, and Blake felt sweat starting to bead on his forehead despite the AC cranking. People were starting to notice something was happening. Conversations died down as heads turned their way. Blake wanted to bolt for the door, but his feet felt glued to the floor. This was it. His carefully maintained double life was about to explode. "Wait." Samantha's voice cut through the dying chatter like a knife. Blake's heart hammered against his ribs. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward them, including his parents. This was happening too fast. He wasn't ready for his two worlds to collide, especially not in front of an audience. Trevor moved closer to his fiancée, irritation written all over his face. "Samantha, you're being weird. Stop staring at my brother like that." But she ignored him completely. Her phone shook in her grip as she took another step toward Blake. The room went dead quiet except for some jazz playing in the background. Everyone waited to see what would happen next. Blake's vision started getting fuzzy around the edges. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but his muscles had turned to concrete. All those years of keeping his success secret, and it was about to blow up in the worst possible way. Samantha opened her mouth twice before any sound came out. "You're Blake Morrison." The name hit the room like a bomb going off. Confused murmurs erupted everywhere. Blake's last name was Patterson, not Morrison. Trevor actually laughed, the sound sharp and nervous. "His name is Blake Patterson," Trevor corrected, talking to Samantha like she was 5 years old. "My younger brother. You know, the one I told you about who..." He didn't finish, but everyone got it. Samantha shook her head hard. "No, you don't understand." Her voice got stronger, more certain. "Blake Morrison, you created Shadow Realm Chronicles." Blake's knees almost gave out. His pen name, the identity he'd used for his gaming empire, hanging in the air like an accusation. Of all the ways this could have happened, this was definitely the worst. The confused muttering got louder. Most of the older folks looked blank, but the younger cousins were already pulling out phones, frantically Googling. Blake watched realization dawn on their faces, one by one. "That's impossible," Trevor scoffed, but his voice cracked a little. Blake barely scraped through community college. He lives in some dump and works at. He trailed off, probably realizing he had no clue what Blake actually did for work. Samantha's excitement was building like steam in a kettle. Shadow Realm Chronicles has over 50 million downloads. It's the biggest mobile RPG of the past 2 years. She turned to address the whole room. "This man is worth millions. He's one of the most successful indie game developers in the world." Dead silence. Blake felt like he was watching a train wreck in slow motion. Years of careful secrecy, gone in 30 seconds. His mom's face went through about 6 different expressions before settling on horror. All those lectures about getting a real job, all those comparisons to Trevor's conventional success, all those times she'd told him to stop wasting time on computers. Dad's face had gone beet red. Whether from embarrassment or rage, Blake couldn't tell. Trevor grabbed Samantha's arm, gripped tight enough to bruise. "Stop this crap. You're embarrassing yourself and ruining our party." But she yanked away from him, eyes blazing. "I have the game right here. I play it every single day. I've spent hundreds of dollars on upgrades." She held up her phone, showing the Shadow Realm Chronicles logo. "Look at the developer credit. Blake Morrison, Morrison Game Studio." One of Blake's younger cousins let out a strangled gasp. "Oh my God, I know that game. Everyone at school is obsessed with it." He stared at Blake like he'd grown a second head. "Dude, you're like... famous." Blake's mouth felt like he'd been chewing sand. He tried to speak, to explain, to say something, but nothing came out. Years of keeping this secret had left him completely unprepared for exposure. Mom sank into the nearest chair, face pale as paper. "Blake?" Her voice sounded tiny, uncertain. "Is this actually true?" The question hung there like a sword waiting to drop. Blake's voice came out like sandpaper. "Yeah." That one word shattered what was left of the party. Dad's wine glass slipped from his fingers and exploded on the white carpet, red liquid spreading like a crime scene. Trevor's face went through about 10 emotions in 5 seconds: disbelief, anger, and something that might have been panic. His golden boy status was crumbling in real time, and everyone could see it happening. "How long?" Mom's voice barely qualified as a whisper. Blake swallowed hard. 5 years developing. Game launched 3 years ago. 5 years of family dinners where they'd crapped all over his life choices. 5 years of being treated like a loser while he quietly built an empire. 5 years of watching Trevor get praised for his 6-figure salary while Blake made more in a month than Trevor saw all year. Samantha was still scrolling through articles on her phone. Forbes estimated his net worth at $25 million last year, she announced to the shell-shocked room. Dad found his voice first, though it sounded like he'd been strangled. $25 million? From a game? Blake nodded, feeling like he was moving through thick syrup. Everything felt surreal, like watching someone else's life fall apart on TV. The game pulls in about $2 million per month. After platform cuts and expenses, I keep around 60%. The math hit the room like a physical slap. Trevor's annual salary became pocket change compared to Blake's monthly take. The son they'd written off as a failure was quietly out-earning everyone in the room by ridiculous margins. Samantha kept reading from her phone. He won 3 industry awards, including Mobile Game Developer of the Year. She looked up at Blake with something close to awe. "You gave the keynote at Game Developers Conference last March." Blake remembered that speech. 3,000 people hanging on his every word about game design and player psychology. Same weekend, he'd missed Dad's birthday dinner because his family figured he was playing video games and wouldn't understand family obligations. Mom stood up slowly, legs wobbly like a newborn deer. She walked toward Blake like she was approaching a dangerous animal. When she reached him, she stuck out her hand like he was a stranger at a business meeting. "Blake Morrison," she said, testing the name. "All this time you were, and we never." She couldn't finish, but Blake got it. All this time, they'd been living with a celebrity and treating him like garbage. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Trevor's face had gone through several color changes and settled on sick green. His whole identity as the successful son had evaporated in minutes. Worse, he was realizing his loser brother had been humoring him for years, quietly achieving success on a scale Trevor couldn't even imagine. "Why didn't you tell us?" Dad's voice cracked. Blake met his father's eyes without shame for the first time in years. "Would you have believed me?" The answer hung in the air unspoken. Obviously not. Samantha had drifted closer to Blake, completely ignoring Trevor's increasingly desperate attempts to get her attention back. Her eyes were shining with something that looked dangerously like attraction. "I can't believe I'm actually meeting you," she gushed. "Your game literally got me through grad school. I must have played for hundreds of hours," she laughed. "Guess I helped fund your success." Trevor finally lost it. "Samantha, stop drooling over my brother and remember who you're supposed to marry." But she turned to look at Trevor like she was seeing him for the first time. The golden boy who'd seemed so impressive an hour ago now looked ordinary, maybe even pathetic. Standing next to someone who'd achieved real success through actual talent instead of following the safe corporate path. Blake watched the whole family dynamic flip upside down in real time. The hierarchy that had defined his entire life was crumbling, and somehow he'd ended up on top of a mountain he'd never wanted to climb. Trevor's desperation was getting painful to watch as his fiancée kept ignoring him. "This doesn't change anything," he announced loudly, trying to take control back. "Success isn't just about money. It's about character, about doing things the right way, about—" "About what?" Blake interrupted, his voice steady for the first time all night. Years of bottled-up frustration finally found an outlet. "About getting approval from people who never bothered to understand what I was actually doing?" The challenge hung in the air like smoke. Blake had spent so many years accepting their judgment that fighting back felt weird and amazing at the same time. Mom's eyes filled with tears. "Blake, we didn't know. If you'd just told us." "I tried," Blake said quietly. "Remember when I explained about developing a mobile game? You told me to stop screwing around and get a real job. When I tried to show you my work, Dad said I was too old to be playing with toys." Dad's face crumpled as the memories came flooding back. Every dismissed conversation, every eye roll, every lecture about responsibility had been aimed at someone who was quietly building an empire. Samantha suddenly stepped between Blake and Trevor, her decision crystallizing right there in front of everyone. "I'm sorry, Trevor, but I can't do this." Trevor went white as paper. "What do you mean?" She slipped off the engagement ring and held it out to him. "I mean, I can't marry someone who treats his own family like dirt." Blake accomplished something incredible, and instead of being proud, you've spent years making him feel worthless. The room gasped like they were watching a soap opera. Trevor stared at the ring like it might bite him. "You can't be serious," he stammered. "You're throwing away our future for him? For my loser brother?" Samantha's eyes flashed with anger. "He's not a loser. He's brilliant and successful and talented. And he did all of this while being treated like garbage by the people who should have supported him." Blake felt dizzy. This wasn't how he'd pictured his secret coming out. He'd never wanted to destroy Trevor's life or flip his family upside down. He just wanted to be left alone to do his work. But watching Samantha defend him felt like vindication after years of silence. 6 months later, Blake sat in his new corner office on the 40th floor, looking out over downtown Portland. The mountains stretched beyond the city like a postcard. A hell of a upgrade from the tiny apartment where he'd coded the first version of Shadow Realm Chronicles. His phone buzzed with a text from Samantha. "Dinner tonight? Found a new place I think you'll love." They'd been together for 4 months now. Much to Trevor's ongoing horror, she'd called off the engagement that same night and moved out of the apartment she'd shared with his brother. Their relationship had developed slowly, built on actual connection instead of the surface-level attraction that had drawn her to Trevor. His family kept trying to rebuild things with him, but some damage runs pretty deep. They did monthly dinners now instead of the weekly torture sessions, and conversations felt careful, almost formal. Trust, once you break it, doesn't exactly snap back into place. Trevor had bailed to Seattle for a fresh start, couldn't handle the constant reminders of his fall from grace. He'd sent one bitter email, calling Blake's success dumb luck, before cutting contact completely. Blake smiled and texted back, "Can't wait." Outside his window, the city sparkled in the afternoon sun, full of possibilities he'd never dared imagine during all those years of sitting quietly in corners, letting his family define him as their disappointment. Turns out the loser had been winning all along.